Gross!
Pixar's amazing Ratatouille. Some of you may be surprised to hear I'm calling this amazing, considering our recent Pixar ranking. I had it a good bit lower than others, considering a lot of you think this is the best Pixar movie ever. And easily, I think this is probably my most controversial Pixar take. However, I never said that I damn well hated this movie. Remember, this is still Pixar, the studio where over half of their movies are absolute S-tier quality, alongside a collection of C-tier sequels to those S-tier movies. Alas, whilst there's movies I'd put over it, Ratatouille is, by all measures, a really good movie. And why should we be surprised by that? Brad Bird was directing. He directed my #1 Pixar movie, The Incredibles. I'm just spoiling that ranking, but it's, that's like my most milquetoast take, so whatever. But what makes this movie, with its completely random premise of a rat who cooks using a human puppet, such an enduring classic that now has its own combined ride and restaurant at Disneyland Paris? Well, let's go and take a look. Like The Incredibles, Brad Bird once again opens the movie with some world building told through old TV footage. Except instead of superhero interviews, we have a quick blast of who Gusto is, followed by an interview with Anton Ego. Both, of course, crucial to the story, but their more important role here is establishing the message that will run throughout this entire movie. Anyone can cook.
No, I don't think anyone can do it.
And of course, the first character we meet after this is the little chef himself. From here we head to a bright but moody French countryside with gunshots coming from inside of the house. This is a weird thing to point out first, but the sort of lighting used for this rainy French countryside is captured so accurately. I know, it's slightly geographically different. As a British guy, I can very much verify for the most part that this is the look and sound accurate to most days around this part of the world. It just looks like that classic European countryside in a way that's really well captured. What more can I say? It's clearly daylight, but there's a murkiness to it, And in a movie with such an absurd idea, the movie consistently grounds itself in capturing the character of France itself. Especially when it goes to Paris. It's like they just scanned the whole country and perfectly rendered it accordingly.
This is me. I think it's apparent I need to rethink my life a little bit.
Yes, we then head straight into the "this is me" trope. Well-trodden territory, but not necessarily done with a rat smashing through a window with a book before. It also makes sense, as Remy is going to be narrating in and out throughout the movie, particularly in the scenes interacting with Linguini where he can't actually speak. This movie's all about him finding his metaphorical voice, so it all feeds into the themes, no pun intended. This narration takes us into the rat lifestyle, and kinda weird to say, but understanding their standing within human society is also crucial to the story. You have this rat who wants to become a cook when the kitchen is notoriously the worst room to find a rat in. Whilst we know this is the case in the real world, establishing from the beginning that this dynamic is shared in this world is key to the conflicts in this narrative, particularly as it often doesn't in a lot of other rat mice media. Mickey Mouse, The Rescuers, Great Mouse Detective, and even Flushed Away, there's never a genuine exploration of the perception of these characters as pests, other than a rat poison joke probably somewhere in the background. It's certainly mentioned in Flushed Away, but they're kind of in their own underground world, and even in Roddy's case, he's a pet rat. This is genuinely probably the best actual portrayal of a rat's life on screen, which I guess is a take that we're now going with for this. It's a story that no one asked for, yet they absolutely smashed it anyway. And there's absolutely a lot more going on here than the cooking rat premise. With Remy's family relationships alone, we get the story of a creative son from a lower standings background clashing with the dad wanting everyone to stay and support the family business.
Suddenly Dad didn't think my talent was useless.
To the extent that they will find a way of using said talent in the family business. Despite the rat overlay, all the hallmarks of a creative person's struggles are there. Giving Remy super smell sense is the first touch of fantasy added here, but it's a detail that they made weirdly believable. You can believe that a rat could have this sense. I mean, look at the size of that schnoz he's got going on there. But also his ability to smell each individual ingredient also gives some believability of why he'd not only be a good chef, but ultimately a better one than the human chefs. What they also do in this opening section of the movie is, in a matter of minutes, convince you of this rat's passion to cook. This, by all means ridiculous premise for a story, has sold you within minutes. And that is because Remy is written with a believable human personality with intelligence and interest.
They create. I mean, just look at what they do with food.
And notice how these qualities are apparent from him talking about other topics and not himself. It's not just, hi, I'm a super intelligent rat and now I want to cook because... And Patton Oswalt was so well cast for this as well. Not only does his natural voice just seem to fit this rat, but also he brings a sincerity to Remy, which is kind of vital when his key attributes are passion and creativity. He didn't play up to voicing a cartoon rat, he understood that Remy is essentially a genius trapped in a rat's body. And yes, it's here where we get the first flavor visualization sequence, you know the one. This is the level of Pixar's game by this point. They visually created the experience of flavor. I can't think of any other movie that's ever actually done that. If they have very much, I'm sorry, I haven't seen it apparently, or I forgot. With this, the narration, and of course the Gusteau ghost later, it reinforces the idea that the storytelling is from Remy's perspective. When you have a character whose imagination and creativity is what's driving the plot, it's pretty handy to be able to have a look inside of that imagination.
Did you ever think about how we walk on the same paws that we handle food with?
There's sort of 3 W's to this line in particular. Further detail of Remy's insight into food and dining, you address how rats and hygiene don't necessarily sit together in a way that helps you accept Remy being around the kitchens later on, and you subliminally tell kids to wash their hands. Not that Remy is a completely responsible figure.
You think that maybe we shouldn't be so...
It's fine, they survive. Remember the premise, if you wanted more realism, go to another movie, apparently.
lightning-y?
It's lightning-y!
Over to the kitchen sequence, whilst you know it's all going to go wrong, it's another decision that informs the character. Remy takes this risk here to season his food. And also the fact he has this nonchalant attitude here says way more about the amount of times he's done this than when Emil asks him about it. Even him finally dropping the ball and getting caught is completely justified, as of course he's gonna get sucked into the news of his idol dying. In fact, the TV sequence sucks us in the same way, which makes the TV suddenly turning off as a jump scare moment for us as well.
Gusteau is dead?
The line just before about her always having the cooking channel on also just further builds this backstory of how Remy would have gotten interested in cooking to a more profound degree. Anyway, over to the shooting.
No, you'll lead her to the colony!
You gotta love a completely unhinged old lady shooting holes into her own ceiling to kill 2 rats. Although that visual of her quickly learning that there were significantly more than 2 rats, you do kind of sympathize with that not being a nice situation to fall into. It's the one point in the movie where they let the rats come across as gross, at least acknowledging that this sight would be pretty horrific. That's about as sympathetic as it gets for this psycho though, as she comes back with gas. I just love how ridiculously hardcore this old lady is. It's a pretty over-the-top example of establishing the dangers in the rat world and the risk being around humans poses. Though way overplayed here, it is true that people's panic over rats and mice in the home can result in probably some quite impulsive solutions. See a rat? First instinct is to get rid of it. Don't worry about destroying the house though. On to the plunge through the sewer sequence. See also this movie's cousins, Flushed Away and Stuart Little. Again, Remy flagging behind to grab a book would otherwise seem like a really dumb thing to do, and yet this makes sense as a decision the character established would make. Obviously, it doesn't work out for him. And it's interesting to see a completely different take on the sequence we'd already seen the previous year in Flushed Away. That was obviously played for laughs. I mean, you got a bit with Roddy grabbing a cereal bar that looks like someone else. Here, on the other hand, Remy falling into the abyss of the rapids is maybe the most intense sequence in the movie. If the visuals alone don't illustrate the violent streams that Remy's being fired into, then the sound design certainly will. Not only is it relentless, but it also gives Remy a literal violent separation from his family. And the visuals are so impactful as it's all kept from Remy's miniature perspective. This stream down a drain becomes a Pacific Ocean inside of a tunnel. And through all that, somehow the book has survived. Yeah, okay, I guess we are about to have a man who can be controlled via his hair, so I'll let go of the overly waterproof book, I guess. And it is here we meet...
I am a figment of your imagination.
It's a great way of incorporating Gusteau into this movie because it allows Remy to be able to talk to someone during these long stretches of movie where he's either on his own or with the actual human character that he can't speak to. It's an outlet for him. It could have worked just having Remy silent in general, but perhaps a bit jarring when it's shown to have a sharp and articulate voice, which could be shown through narration too, but that can get exhausting when you have too much of it. and doesn't really allow us to hear Remy's thoughts in the present moment of the story. So yeah, the illustration / ghost Gusto was a great idea for the functions of the movie.
Now go up and look around.
However, the star attraction of this scene is the sequence without any dialogue, as Remy scurries through nooks and crannies of the city. All these little vignettes he runs past build a personality and character to the setting that we shall remain in for the rest of the movie. Admittedly, I'm sure a French person watching this will either be amused or completely unamused by this American interpretation of their capital city. The couple that go for the gun struggle to making out kind of come to mind in that. However, from my limited perspective, I wouldn't be surprised if Pixar did a much better job with this than a lot of other movies. The behind the scenes stuff shows some of the Pixar team doing some R&D in France, with the animators even having a day where they had to work in a French kitchen. Certainly, visually, they absolutely killed it. That shot of Remy looking on at the Paris skyline is now an iconic image, and it's easy to see why. The fact that Pixar went from Toy Story to this in just 10 years is pretty mind-blowing when you think about it. And then you compare 2015 to now. It was kind of cooler when technology jumped bigger, you know?
It's beautiful.
The most beautiful.
And here we go to Gusto's, featuring some impeccably animated food. Another initially weird thing to highlight, but when you have a restaurant where the food is essentially meant to taste better than any food that actually exists, it's gotta look the part. Not easy when you have to create it out of pixels to actually recreate organic materials that you would actually want to eat. You know, everything in Toy Story looked damn well plastic. This is the kind of thing that technology wouldn't have actually been able to do when Pixar started. Which brings us to the introduction of...
She believed in heaven, so she's covered.
Linguini, the archetype of all Tom Holland and Timothée Chalamet type protagonists to follow. And in case you didn't know, the voice of this guy is one of the animators. And not for the first time. Rather appropriately in hindsight, his previous main line was, "This little rat is guilty!" How did I not know this before? I don't know how I take the, you sound like an awkward, incompetent guy in his 20s, can we use your voice, but Campbell apparently paid off. This guy is ironically a great voice actor, giving Linguini that underlying insecurity and a sincerity behind his emotions. I've used sincerity a couple of times now, but it's important. In an age of celebrity voice acting, it's not always what you get. Alas, someone who also actually animates the character was a solid play here. And you need sincerity to believe in this otherwise far-fetched story. I also love that we get the key clues of Linguini's parentage here. His mum's literally referred to as Gusto's old fling. Yet, on the first watch, it's not necessarily something you pick up on. Back to Remy, and they make this introduction to the different roles in the kitchen genuinely engaging.
The sous is responsible for the kitchen when the chef's not around.
Of course, great for illustrating Remy's knowledge of it, but also I wouldn't have known any of these roles without Ratatouille. This is to a certain extent an educational movie. And as Remy falls into the kitchen, once again, this moment is still instigated by his passion. Just like his reaction to Gusto's death led to the colony being foiled, his reaction to Linguini trying to wing cooking,
He's ruining the soup!
is what leads him to toppling into this situation. Which brings us onto something really overlooked when talking about Ratatouille. There are at least 3 solid action sequences in this. It may sound weird to call them action sequences necessarily when it's literally a rat running about a kitchen, but that's what they are. This guy dives into water, evades flames, jumps through the closing gap of an oven in the nick of time. They're gonna need Tom Cruise as Remy in the live-action remake, I'm telling you now. Making these otherwise pedestrian human activities huge and terrifying consequences to someone of Remy's size turns a movie largely set in one kitchen into a thrilling spectacle and laser-focused on Remy's
Perspective.
It's his story, quite literally from his angle. And yet, despite almost dying, his intuition for cooking will not let him leave without fixing that soup. Which, even before Gusto turns up, it's just apparent from his facial expressions as he looks back at the soup. Once again, his passion is what keeps him here and, in turn, causes the entire story that unfolds from this point. The reputation, ownership, and admittedly closure of this restaurant all happens because the damn rat couldn't leave the soup alone, and it's all set in character.
You know how to fix it? This is your chance.
This is also when sending the Pixar animators to an actual French kitchen pays off as well, regardless of whether it is actually recipe accurate. It at least looks like this guy knows exactly what he's doing. Every move in this sequence looks precise and deliberate, whilst also making what is essentially just throwing ingredients into a pot thrilling to watch. And it's stuff like this that puts Pixar above the rest, really. The camera spinning around the pot as Remy leaps over it with ingredients, it perhaps portrays the sequence as almost a dance, which is perfect because this is very much an artist expressing themselves. The camera spin also naturally brings us to the next beat of Linguini catching him. The blocking of this next scene is essential for the rest of the story to really hold water. Linguini trapping Remy, right? Makes sense that his awkward self would panic catch the rat, but also be too scared to mention it, whilst making sure Remy is kept there to hear about his soup being praised by the critic.
Anyone can cook.
Remy escaping, but then being spotted by Skinner, now sets up a direct arc between Remy and the antagonist to often hilarious results, whilst also trapping Remy to have that vital interaction with Linguini in the next scene.
That's a spice, isn't it? Rosemary?
These are the riches that come out of the notorious Pixar story room. Each step in the game aligns and is influenced by where the playing pieces are on the board. From this scene, we also establish a concrete grasp on the rules of the world. Namely, whilst Remy is a super intelligent rat who can understand humans and visually communicate with them, he can't just suddenly speak to them. You know the drill with most of these movies between an animal and human protagonist. They're gonna be talking to each other. B-Movie came out the same year as this and did some interesting things with that MO, let's just say that.
You like jazz?
However, here they show how removing the animal's ability to speak can make this whole dynamic a lot more interesting for the storytelling. When the animals can speak to humans, it makes them almost too human. Like, at this point, does the human race in that universe have to acknowledge that animals have the same level of sentience and rethink how we do things? Apparently, B-Movie has the balls to actually answer that question. Here, we maintain the barrier between the two, making sure they're kept a species apart. Because though Remy's obviously more receptive than an actual animal, Linguini speaking to this animal that can't speak back reminds a lot of us of how we speak to animals and pets.
Look, it's delicious, but don't steal.
If Remy could talk, that would surely be more remarkable than the cooking, and that's just not the story they're telling here. The same goes for getting them to learn to cook together. Remy having the ability to puppet Linguini via his hair is a completely absurd idea, though in keeping with the tone of this movie. However, even with the tone in mind, the Pixar team know that the audience need to see a struggle to this point to get on board. You buy into them making this dynamic work because you see them fail before getting there. From the initial pitch to put Remy down his pants, to Remy biting Linguini's body all over, which, for all Linguini knew, could have given him a pretty serious infection. I hope he went to the doctor. They don't discover this method immediately.
We just need to work out a system.
The best way to sell an audience on a convenient plot device is making the journey to mastering it seem as inconvenient as possible. It's like a movie with wizards learning spells. These spells may not exist, but by showing characters struggle to get those spells right and inventing your own power system with rules built into it, you help the audience buy into the believability of the world the story takes place in. So yes, have your rat be able to operate a human man by their hair follicles. Just make sure you give us a sequence of that actually being really difficult to get the hang of it to help us believe in it. The scene of them working it all out in Linguini's flat gives us a great sequence of physical comedy whilst also serving this function. It's the cardinal rule. The humor must be either informed by or part of the storytelling. Although just saying, this is a particular highlight. The transitions in progress are also just done impeccably until finally we have the transition from chopping at home to chopping in the kitchen.
Colette will be responsible for teaching you how we do things here.
By the way, did you realize that Bilbo Baggins himself, Ian Holm, is the voice of Skinner in this movie? He absolutely kills it in this. The Skinner character is just that right balance of tyrannical head chef and unhinged foil. On to Colette, who we properly get to meet here. It's interesting how her premise as the only female chef is tackled head on here.
Because haute cuisine is an antiquated hierarchy built upon rules written by stupid old men.
We see this time and time again, where an ensemble just has the one girl character animated movies included. And whilst I'm not sure it necessarily excuses the all-male rat family situation, it does seem to have a point to make in the case of the kitchen, which is notoriously a male-dominated career environment, which has also factored into informing her character, as demonstrated here. A professional kitchen's harsh enough already, let alone for a person who's had to contend with double the societal obstacles to even be here. Of course she's going to be a fierce force of nature, and this is reflected in the rest of the kitchen too, as Colette does the famous rundown of each person in the kitchen. You know, including the line that everyone quotes.
I killed a man with this thumb.
The other chefs aren't characters we do ever get to know a great deal about, but this scene both gives them some extra meat to their backstories to hilarious effect, whilst also making it feel like almost a shame we ever did learn more about them. However, in this environment of dark backstory figures, Linguini proving to be the one person who doesn't need that level of antagonism from Colette to listen to what she has to say over the course of the sequence, also arguably sets up why she takes a liking to him.
Thank you, by the way, for all the advice about cooking.
She just appreciates someone who listens to her.
Thank you too for taking it.
However, just before that, we get the reveal that things aren't as simple as they seem with Linguini's appearance at Gusteau, even if Linguini himself isn't fully aware of it.
Get my lawyer.
Yes, this is where the next spinning plate arises of Linguini, at least potentially, being Gusteau's son. And I love the storytelling choice of this being something to antagonize Skinner with, as Linguini seems to organically make his mark through his supposed cooking abilities. Throughout this movie, who has what piece of information at what time is the driving force of the tension on both sides. The antagonist holds a sense of tension from his withheld information, that being Linguini's parentage, whilst both protagonists hold a sense of tension from the fact that one of them has a rat under his hat and the other is the rat. Hey there, thank you for making it to the halfway mark of this video. Come along and subscribe since you're halfway through the video. We do more amazings, as you can probably assume, but I'll make this one short. Back to the second half of Pixar's amazing Ratatouille. Skinner also getting glimpses of Remy in a way that could be interpreted as his own paranoia is just a great touch, and keeps him tied as an antagonist to Remy as well, rather than just solely Linguini. Skinner capturing him later wouldn't seem as direct or personal if we didn't have these nuggets of him being kept on Skinner's mind earlier on. Yeah, you know what? I think Skinner might be my favorite character. Screw the rat in the Rat movie. Particularly for just how he says Linguini.
Asking for food from Linguini?
From here, we have Skinner making his next move on the metaphorical chessboard, sabotaging Linguini with a notoriously terrible recipe, to which Remy manages to counterattack by putting a different sauce on it. Yeah, I'm not sure if just changing the sauce alone could remedy the weird stuff in the recipe, but this guy's meant to be the best of the best, so sure thing. And to be fair, the animation somehow managed to even make this conceptually disgusting meal look appetizing. We also have another rivalry arise between Remy and Colette here, though Colette, of course, doesn't know it yet. It's yet another interesting way of using this unusual story framework to create obstacles and challenges. Again, not making this hair-controlling ability so easy. You can also chop away at metaphors here for a creative mind taking over and either not listening to others or leading with head over heart. There's a lot you can take away from this dichotomy, actually. Of course, the gamble pays off and Skinner finds himself in a position where he's just escalated his own destruction.
Special order! Special order! Special order!
But he's not gonna give up there. After thinking he's got himself a Remy catch, Skinner decides it's time to get Linguini drunk.
And you, Monsieur Linguini, are no idiot.
I notice that at this point, Skinner's obsession with Linguini is less about the wheel and more about the rat, which bizarrely, in fairness, is kind of fair enough, seeing as Remy is legitimately there, yet Skinner still seems kind of unhinged by it. Technically, there's nothing wrong about a head chef wanting to get rid of a rat in his kitchen. The paranoia about Linguini and the wheel has been truly manifested by the rat in the hat. Meanwhile, for the first time in almost 15 minutes, we actually hear Remy speaking again. Discount the narration, and you can make that the first time since he tried to escape the kitchen that he's actually said an actual word.
Remy!
A meal?
Quite something that out of millions of rats in France, these two specifically bumped into each other again. Not even one of the thousands in the colony, specifically Emile. Ah well. Along with Remy hilariously trying to educate Emile on flavor, this scene also gives us progression of how comfortable Remy's become in his new lifestyle. Both calling Paris his town and casually helping himself to the food supply. It's clear he's become very settled, which is key to the point his father will go on to make in the very next scene, in which the tension between him and Remy's just played off so well.
We're rats. We don't leave our nests. We make them bigger.
Well, maybe I'm a different kind of rat.
Even just the slight smugness on Remy's face continues that shift in confidence we started to see develop, which just ushers his dad to take him down a peg with possibly the darkest scene in the movie.
Now, this is what happens when a rat gets a little too comfortable around humans.
I'm presuming they don't just have dead rats rotting in the window, but the image is striking regardless. Not every day you see implied dead bodies in a Pixar movie. But even here, Remy refuses to accept this as the endgame.
You're telling me that the future can only be more of this?
And this isn't really talking about a rat's place in the natural hierarchy, is it? It's talking about anyone from any background who's made to feel like they can't do something because of the way things are. That's this movie, using the lens of this insurmountable idea of a rat who wants to work in a kitchen to emphasize that even if what you want to do feels impossible from where you are, that is not a reason to not try and do it anyway. And standing up to the parent who feels otherwise because they're the ones who felt stuck their whole life is what we're seeing here. Anyway, the emotional stuff over, let's enjoy this cut to the next morning.
Hey, yeah.
And into Remy puppeteering Sleepy Linguini, which is both another great comedic concept and also essentially crash courses his relationship with Colette.
I wanted you to succeed. I liked you.
By his initial apparent ignorance to her feeding into her worries that he doesn't need her anymore, Linguini has to take things up a gear and reveal his big secrets. However, Remy sees differently and leans in for the kiss instead, which is weird when you think about it. Like, there's 3 different people involved with this kiss here. And from love to hate, we go over to Ego's lair. If you're here watching my videos, I am assuming you already know all the stuff about his office looking like a coffin, accompanied by a typewriter that looks like a skull. Lovely. With the newest version of Nosferatu out at the moment as well, you do wonder if the original fed into Ego's character design before as well. I mean, the guy is consistently drinking red wine, certainly not the first time Nosferatu's popped up in animation anyway. I'm sure the Pixar team had a pretty good time doing a critic like this as well. This cold, bitter, vampiric figure who also feeds into how the human characters do all seem to be modeled around French caricature. I never really picked up on that until now, but I'm pretty sure that's exactly what's going on here. There was always something inherently French to how these characters looked, and I think that just might be it. And we can't move on from here without the best pronunciation of popular of all time.
How could it be popular?
This scene also justifies literally calling a character Ego as well, taken aback by the prospect of a restaurant reacquiring any profile after giving it a bad review. On to another fractured ego as Skinner's paranoia hits breaking point, and it's confirmed that Linguini is indeed Gusto's dad. No, Gusto's son. With a crazed conspiracy of the rat being a mind game. His crazed overthinking now completely wrapped around the rat, which again is hilarious because Remy is absolutely entitled to being freaked out about, but also he's trying to steal a business from its rightful owner, so we don't have to feel too sorry for him. He is meant to be the villain.
Should I be concerned about this?
Also the fact that this guy sees him have an absolute meltdown about a rat only to drop this as he walks out the door.
Because the first time it came back identified as rodent hair.
That's a class A troll right there. Meanwhile, the rats head over Human's heart with Linguini trying to take Colette's advice over Remy. And it seems like this where you can really appreciate Remy's character animation, as they have to take the Gromit approach of conveying absolutely everything through facial expressions and not dialogue. I mean, the Pixar team are self-confessed Aardman fans, so that checks out. The earlier scenes of Remy having tomatoes splattered in his face could even be interpreted as a homage to Gromit taking jam to the face in The Wrong Trousers. Or maybe I'm just a nerd. And much like Gromit, Remy finds his master sideline him for a love interest. To be fair, Remy falling from the bike ride was probably for the best. I think we can all take a guess at why Colette was rushing Linguini home. Don't need the rat taking the wheel for that situation. It's also an opportunity for Remy to get a hard reminder of what his dad was talking about. The violence and hysteria the humans have every time they see a rat may be heightened here, but it does help reinforce the threat level just the fact of being a rat carries. Much like Remy, it would be easy for the storytelling to get complacent and forget to remind us of that sense of danger. Good job there's no idiot brother involved to make Remy's situation even more contentious.
Hey, is there a problem over here?
As imaginary Gusteau tries to talk Remy out of it, it brings us back to perhaps one of the secondary messages in the movie, as there's a lot of moments that revolve around creating instead of stealing. And it's actually something that's been hotly debated online, particularly as to whether this is meant to be a genuine message for younger viewers, or just to reflect that Gusteau is Remy's internal conscience. It's a strange one because the times that Remy does technically steal, he is externally punished within the story. It's the one aspect of the movie that is kind of weird because rats don't really have a choice in the matter, beyond raiding the whole kitchen. You know, the other points Remy has to steal don't seem particularly egregious considering his situation. Anyway, that issue quickly is sidelined when Remy discovers the will.
He's your son?
I have a son?
In multiple ways, the breaking point for Skinner. Imagine the will that you've been so worried about that you've been seeing a rat that may or may not be real all over the place, only to find said will in the mouth of said rat. Honestly, after the firing, I'm surprised he didn't just have a full-blown meltdown.
Should I be concerned about you?
The subsequent chase sequence with Skinner is both an incredibly entertaining scene, whilst also highlighting the stakes of the will. The whole chase is what I was talking about earlier with the very first kitchen scene. This movie doesn't have a lot of action, but the flashes it does have are surprisingly well done. Maybe not surprisingly, this is the director of The Incredibles behind this. Something else to note about the slapstick throughout this is that there may be some more French cinema influence going into it. Specifically, the comedies of cinema legend Jacques Tati, who, for those who didn't know, was the biggest influence of Mr. Bean himself, Rowan Atkinson. There's a lot of physical comedy in Ratatouille, particularly when Remy is puppeting Linguini, and it isn't a massive leap to suggest that some of Jacques Tati's work was also an influence here. And now we've reached a turning point in the movie.
He's not in your office. You are in his.
Again, the theme of people claiming what's not theirs continues to be an overriding theme in this movie. Whether it's Skinner trying to hold on to what's not his, Linguini becoming more comfortable passing Remy's talent off as his own, or Remy raiding the food, they're definitely holding this up as a value. Which works, aside from the implication that people who have no other choice are in the wrong as well. And with all those examples, there is ultimately a comeuppance. By keeping it a secret, as we see in this sequence with the famous song that everyone on TikTok to do is France has whacked over it, Skinner loses his job entirely whilst Linguini gets the riches and rewards. However, those riches then get to Linguini's head, as we see in the next scene.
Where do you get your inspiration?
Mine is named Colette.
To be fair, I don't know how you broach the "it's actually a rat who's doing everything" topic in this situation. When Ego visits Linguini at the press conference, it seems appropriate that it's at this point when Linguini's ego is the most inflated too. It does seem like just his presence represents Ego beyond himself. I mean, Gusteau allegedly died after Ego damaged his, well, ego. And with a quick whip of one of my favorite lines in the movie,
"If I don't love it, I don't swallow."
The third act is set. Ego's coming over for dinner, which Linguini takes as the perfect opportunity to cheese off the only guy with a genuine shot at impressing him.
I'm not your puppet.
This arc of Linguini being Gusteau's son is also interesting in what it says about the backgrounds of the old anyone can cook mentality. Just like Remy is ultimately heralded as the finest chef in France, despite being literally raised by rats, Linguini is a completely helpless chef, despite being the son of Gusteau himself. Quite an appropriate message for France, who did a whole revolution against the idea that divine right and ability is an inherited thing. The main Fallout character has begun, but at least our guy Skinner can now put all the gaslighting to bed.
The rat is the cook.
Well, the rat's about to be stoking up some trouble, alright.
Tell Dad to bring the whole clan.
And I really don't blame him. The entire restaurant's resurrection has been built on his cooking at this point, and he's the wrong species to financially benefit from it at any capacity. So as far as I'm concerned, the food is his. I'm tossing this theme of stealing is bad out the window. Though, as Linguini apologizes for his actions, you still totally get the sense of betrayal from his perspective as well. I also hope he cleaned up that stock as well, after hundreds of unwashed rats fondled it all. Though it's all totally worth it for that one shot of a meal and his grapes artillery.
could ever act.
It's such a dopey shot, I love it. The visuals of the rats hiding amongst the food in general are delightful, regardless of how many diseases the customers might have gotten that day.
Don't come back or I'll treat you the way restaurants are supposed to treat pests.
So that was a death threat, right? Despite the fact that he has successfully cooked at Gusteau's restaurant and come as far as he has, the idea that he's not meant to do this overcomes him. It's a document of a creative's journey that feels all but too relatable. With his literal creative conscience gone, we have 5 minutes of Linguini squirming to endure.
Appetite is coming, and he's going to have a big ego. He's coming.
A difficult scene for anyone who's attempted some form of public speaking. Little do any of them know that their old boss is outside trying to trap a rat to cook him in frozen food products.
And I, in return, will not kill you.
All the while, our other antagonist has just arrived to order
a little perspective.
They really don't pull any punches with the portraying of this critic here. Some steam was absolutely let off.
Tell your chef that I want whatever he dares to serve me.
And you've got to appreciate how every inch of expression in Peter O'Toole's vocal performance is reflected in this animation. Every movement of his mouth complements that killer delivery. On to the final moments with Ghost Gusteau as he helps Remy through his I've given up moment.
You only tell me stuff I already know. I know who I am!
A moment that just further justifies having that extra presence there and making that point of knowing yourself in a clear-cut way that everyone can understand. Like, imagine if there was just an internal monologue that Remy was having to himself. Just wouldn't really work the same way, you know? It's also kind of weird how, despite being imaginary, the final moment with Gusteau is kind of touching in its own way.
But you don't, Remy. You never did.
And once Gusteau pulls a bing bong on us, it's time for the muscle rat to pull a hot fuzz on Skinner's car.
No, my other left!
Only for Remy to immediately put himself in the line of death again, just making it all the clearer just how much he's willing to risk for his profession.
Don't touch him!
It's time for Linguini to come clean. It's sort of an exchange as Remy just risks everything to show his loyalty to him. And even though everyone taps out after this, it is still absolutely Linguini's hero moment in the movie. Everything he says is all that Remy has wanted and ultimately needed to hear. You can see it in Remy's eyes as he looks up to Linguini saying it all.
We can be the greatest restaurant in Paris.
But yeah, they all leave. A guy just told them a rat was doing all the cooking under his hat. I guess we can cut them some slack. However, this does lead to another important moment, Remy's dad finally understanding just how important this is to Remy.
I'm talking about guts.
And I love that it doesn't come from him seeing Remy at the height of his talents, as many other movies would do. It comes out of what transpires as somewhat a moment of failure, if anything. It's a clear distinction that his dad grasps the passion, not the talent. Quite often, that's something this kind of arc between a creative and their more traditional father misses. This moment between the two of them is why the subsequent rat kitchen climax is so gratifying to watch.
We're not cooks, but we are family.
It's a nice resolution as well, that to follow your creative ambitions doesn't necessarily equate to a total abandonment of your loved ones. And kidnapping health inspectors aside, they make this fully in keeping with Remy's ideals of doing this as responsibly as possible. Getting all the rats to steam wash themselves is at least trying to make this situation as hygienic as possible. I've also got to assume that this was the most complicated sequence to animate. You can't have any of these damn rats just loitering as background avatars. They are all in this kitchen doing something. Linguini doing the waiting as well. It all just comes together. It's a very tidy bit of payoff. Hey, even Colette comes back after her anyone can cook epiphany causes a major road safety violation.
Just tell me what the rat wants to cook.
This is it. It's Ratatouille time. And here, the Pixar team have the absolute nerve to present a version of the dish that looks so good that no real-life version of it will ever be that good. In live-action movies, that can also be true, but at least there's some hope. Here, there is none. It's animated, it's just a delicious looking collection of pixels. But in fairness, with the turn this story is about to take, you really do believe that this is one of the best meals ever made. Whilst I'm guessing the movie's title came before the dish in this scene did, its origins couldn't be more ideal for this movie's origins.
It's a peasant dish.
There's literally no bones about it, it's a humble dish with supposedly nothing particularly remarkable about it. The meal is more than a pun, it's Remy's story on a plate. As we've discussed, Ego has represented the ego in other characters during the movie, so humbling him with an honest meal that represents no ego makes perfect sense. Though Although this is a rat who picked Ratatouille, so maybe there was some ego going on there anyway. Just saying. Anyway, that leads to the famous scene of Ego's flashback. Yes, Remy nostalgia baits the guy. To be fair though, taste and smells can hold memories like that. In small ways most of the time. Though once in a while, I think we all get those member berries that gives us that ego flashback. And arguably, that's the best way to overcome someone's ego, by taking them back to a point in their life before they had one. This scene is iconic for a reason, and a universe apart from the third act climax to a lot of movies. There's no big action set piece or anyone to be saved other than maybe a critic who'd lost their inner child. Whilst it's not necessarily my favorite, I think that's why this is often seen as amongst Pixar's best, because in both premise and narrative, it's going against the grind, even in terms of other Pixar movies. There's no plane chase, door chase, boat sinking, Omnidroid, even a race with a big crash. There's just a dude being humbled by a meal cooked by a rat. And once he's met Remy, accepted the weird situation and said his thank yous, his review being read out over the visuals of the characters celebrating really punctuates the message of the film. Not subtly, he literally says the thing.
Not everyone can become a great artist, but a great artist can come from anywhere.
If the message of this movie hadn't already been made clear before, it's left on no ambiguous terms here. It's a siren for everyone watching with a passion to hold on to it, regardless of their background or circumstance. If a literal rat can do it, then you can certainly too. I mean, look at him go, with his own bistro at the end. Although I have no idea what they told people when it came to building the rat-sized restaurant floor and Remy's little door staircase. Again, it's kind of futile to apply the logic button to this movie. However, the ending itself is as satisfying as the best meals. Capped off by the man who capped off the film's intro, the now business inventor, Anton Ego. Whereas we opened with that joyless skeletal face just saying,
No, I don't think anyone can do it.
We end with the same face enlightened with joy.
Surprise me!
Lovely stuff, and we fade to Finn. I think the magic thing about this movie is that you cannot say it's quite like anything Pixar's really done. Its premise is some ways absurd, and some ways simple. And my real biggest controversial take about Pixar's Ratatouille is simply the fact that its runtime is too short. But looking through it with a finer tooth comb, maybe a story doesn't have to extend so far long to be the best of the best, since the core idea behind Ratatouille is surprisingly simple and doesn't need to expand in a million directions to master its narrative. I still sometimes feel it's a little bit unsatisfying that it's in and out so quickly and then it's over. Rat likes to cook, appears in kitchen, does cooking, there's an inheritance plotline, critic is here, it's over, defeating multiple antagonists at the same time. But what that short runtime has is some of the best, most in-depth storytelling we really see from Pixar, and certainly against the grain. We've since had the universe of emotions, a city of elements, an outer-body realm of souls, and all that good stuff. But perhaps just once in a while, Pixar particularly sings when they just tell us the story of the rat who wanted to cook. And that was Pixar's amazing Ratatouille. For now, my name's been Daz. Thank you very much for reaching the end of this video. Do tell me your thoughts on Ratatouille. I assume by default it's better than what my standard thoughts are on it. But look at it again this time, you know, it's a good movie. It's a bit short sometimes for me. That's a me thing. And on that note, I shall see you all in a little bit. Bye-bye!